Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 36 of Humanity Rising. Every day since the 22nd of May for 2 hours between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. Central European Time, we've created essentially a space for people from all over the world to come together to share their experiences of the pandemic and to take counsel with each other as to how we can work together more effectively, both to envision and to implement a world beyond the pandemic that is more sustainable and resilient and healthy and in alignment with global systems. This entire week, we have been celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Was in San Francisco, actually, 75 years ago, that the UN Charter was signed. And this week marks the 75th anniversary. So we've been celebrating World Unity Week and taking various themes that have to do with the United Nations, global governance, and how we can more effectively understand one another, how we can dialogue rather than be in perpetual conflict. So today, we wanted to dive into what is really the signature of the United Nations over the last several years, and that's the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I thought, just to frame the discussion, it would be worth giving a narrative as to how we got to the SDGs. It's hard to think about a time before iPhones. It's hard to think of a time before the SDGs. But the Sustainable Development Goals are very, very recent. And if you look at the history of the last 75 years, it was about 15 years after the UN was founded out of the ashes of the Second World War that the Club of Rome issued a report called Limits to Growth that sent shockwaves through the global system. It was the first time, I would say, humanity woke up to the realization that unlimited growth, unlimited exploitation of the planet, unlimited exploitation of resources of all kinds was going to lead to a disaster. And in fact, that there were limits to the carrying capacity of planet Earth. This had never occurred to anyone before the Club of Rome report. I'm sure there were individuals who knew about this and studied it, but at the level of a major global meme, that report carried headlines around the world and set in motion what in the 1970s and 1980s came to be called sort of the beginnings of an awareness of the term sustainability. The whole notion of sustainability is only about 50 years old. Again, it hadn't occurred to people for thousands of years that you needed to do anything other than keep going. And it was unlimited progress. That's the basis of the entire Enlightenment, if you know your history. This notion that science rules supreme and economic growth is perpetual in a never-ending linear progression to more and more and more. And then all of a sudden we realized about 50 years ago that it wasn't so, that our planet is highly delicate and there's a carrying capacity, and that in fact there's limits to growth. And therefore we have to begin to live sustainably. And having lived through that period, I remember that the word sustainability was very controversial. President Bush Sr. at the time ridiculed it. And when it came time to the Rio summit in 1992, which was the first sustainability summit in UN history, and I think the first major sustainability summit anywhere in the world, President Bush made a point not to go because he said, the United States of America doesn't do sustainability. We do growth. But the world met anyway. And it was a sensationally celebrated and effective conference. And that put in motion this notion that we not only have to live sustainably, but we also have to start thinking about it systematically. What does that actually mean? So 18 years later, when the UN met for its Millennium Summit of Heads of State in the year 2000, convened by Secretary General Kofi Annan, which was the largest gathering of heads of state in the history of the world. And I remember that very clearly because I was working with Mikhail Gorbachev and Jane Goodall and Vandana Shiva and Ted Turner and Desmond Tutu and a variety of people. And we had convened the New York Hilton in Midtown Manhattan to coincide with the Millennium Summit of Heads of State. And it was at that Millennial Summit that the leaders of the world, with essential unanimity, came together and dedicated themselves to the Millennium Development Goals, which initially was basically just around the issue of eliminating extreme poverty. That was the only thing that everybody could really agree on. But the impulse towards sustainability would not be denied, because the awareness of climate change, the awareness of overpopulation, the awareness of species extinction, the awareness of water scarcity, the awareness of deforestation, the awareness of ecological toxicity all over the world was growing in the public consciousness and in the corridors of government. So sustainability continued to work its power in the collective global awareness. In 2015, 15 years later, there had been enough research, enough organizing, enough thinking that the United Nations passed the Sustainable Development Goals. 17 Sustainable Development Goals that basically the world, through the United Nations, and most governments, with some notable exceptions like the United States and Sudan and a few other places, consensed around working together in a concerted way, locally, nationally, and globally, to implement the SDGs. And here we are in 2020, again, 75 years later. So I told this story as well as a way to just give a sense to everyone of the laborious process of change, particularly at a global level, with the thousands of languages, the thousands of ethnic groups and cultures, nation states, competing interests, to get the whole world to come to an agreement is almost a miraculous event. So when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals today, and we're going to end with a discussion of dialogue, because the SDGs would not have happened had there not been very attentive dialogue and listening on the part of the different competing interests to get to where we are. So let's dive in. I will introduce the various speakers as they appear, but we're going to start with Eva Vati, who's the CEO of VATI of Sweden. She and I talked about a month ago, I think it was, Eva, and I was so inspired by the work that she's doing in getting businesses to embrace and to work in the area of SDG solutions. So Eva, I want to turn the floor over to you. And what we'll do is each one of the speakers will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes, and then we'll have a general discussion. So if you want to put any questions or comments in the chat or in the Q&A, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, please do. Thank you. Eva, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. And hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you today to share why developing business in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are imperative, and how you can tap into those 12 trillions of business opportunities, $12 trillion of business opportunities there are per year within the frame of the SDGs. But first, I would like to share a short story of mine. 12 years ago, I had a dream I woke up from, a physical dream. I dreamt that I was asking myself a question. What is my purpose in life, and what should I work with? I answered myself in a very clear voice that I should work for the United Nations. At that point of time, I didn't understand this dream, because I had never, ever talked about the United Nations or showing any interest. And because I was a hardcore businesswoman working within the tech industry, leading 300 people in 62 countries. But the dream was so powerful and real. And you know, I sat up in my bed in the middle of the night and looking around and wondering, where did that dream come from? So you understand, I just couldn't ignore it. And I started to educate myself. I started to learn about the United Nations, what they were doing and what they stand for, and saw that this incredible organization doing good for the entire planet. But I also realized that the United Nations was a big marketplace. They actually procure goods and services for billions each year. And Sweden, the country where I come from, is a big contributor to the United Nations. Actually, we are the 6th largest financial contributor in total numbers. But Sweden is only the 75th country doing business with the United Nations. And I was surprised. Why weren't Sweden contributing with expertise? Sweden is a leading country when it comes to innovation, gender equality, environmental solutions. So I started to delve into this area, to enter the UN market with my work as a businesswoman and a leader. Eventually, I became this C-suite woman, leading over 300 people, 80,000 consultants all over the world. And I was really successful in my work. But then in the year of 2016, something really amazing happened, which Jim Garrison just told us about. 193 country leaders agreed upon this wonderful cause to eradicate poverty, to reduce injustice and inequalities, and to solve the climate crisis. And this was the launch of the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. When this happened, I suddenly realized that this was my mission, not to work for the United Nations, but to work with the Sustainable Development Goals. This was the dream I had a couple of years ago. So this was the market that I was going to work with to ensure that United Nations were procuring goods and services from Sweden that was sustainable, innovative, and good for society. But I also realized that the SDGs itself were a huge business opportunity for companies to do good business. and to transform the world into a better place by integrating the SDGs into business strategy. There is a great report from the United Nations that is called Better Business, Better World, which states that there are actually business opportunities of $12 trillion per year within 4 segments, which are sustainable cities, clean energy, good health and well-being, and food and agriculture. So Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals is a guide to the future and represents a great business opportunity for companies. The Sustainable Development Goals itself serves as a tool for companies to design their strategy around. And those companies that make sustainability core to their business strategy, they will drive innovation and become even more competitive. Companies are the engine in the world and the transformators, and they are driving economic growth. Thus, by teaching and transforming companies to do good business, we can transform the world to a more prosperous world. So I had a problem, though, when working with the UN market and trying to get the Swedish companies into the market, because the United Nations had to ensure sustainable procurement according to the SDG 12.7, which means that companies need to integrate the Sustainable Development Goals into business strategy and also communicate on it transparently. So Swedish companies, they haven't done this work of procurement, and they wouldn't qualify for procurement. And even more, in the EU, the European Union, we have this law that says that companies with more than 500 employees need to apply sustainable procurement and report on sustainability. So if you are a small or a medium-sized company and a supplier to these big companies, you'll have to work with sustainability and show how you do it in order to qualify and make business. So what I did to overcome this problem was to actually integrate this SDGs into businesses' processes. And at that specific company that I worked at that point of time. And I had success. We earned Sweden's largest frame agreement within IT consultancy services for the United Nations for this specific company. So ultimately, I had transformed myself, applying my knowledge from business and what I call brain, together with my heart, which is sustainability, and created a unique recipe where sustainability is integrated into business strategy. And this is to deliver business growth while also contributing to societal growth, which is unique. So a year and a half ago, I dared to quit my super well-paid job to start my own company, VATI of Sweden, from nothing, because I truly believe in this market. VATI of Sweden is a company that are educating and certifying professionals and companies on how to integrate the Sustainable Development Goals into business core strategy. And I dare to say that what I do and the way I do it, no one else does. And VATI of Sweden is today the first company in the world certifying companies on integrating the SDGs into business core strategy. So now maybe you're asking, well, how then? How do I tap into these $12 trillion of business opportunities? What is the recipe she's talking about? I'm going to share this recipe with you. So I would please ask for your attention now. And if you have a paper and a pen, please make some notes. This is the 6th step of a process. And I will tell you in a very easy way. So step number 1 is actually you need to really understand the SDGs. You need to read all the 17 goals, but also all the 169 sub-targets and understand how they are relevant for business. Step number 2 is that you need to define your value chain and map those sub-targets that are relevant for your business. And you need to look both at SDGs that are making a positive impact and SDGs that are reducing negative impact, which could be risks. So this can be overwhelming for a company, of course. So I would suggest to find focus and narrow it down. Do not start with all the 169 sub-targets, then you will be lost. So step number 3 to get to focus is therefore to connect with all your stakeholders and your most important stakeholders. And you also need to connect with your business strategy. What is important for your business? Then step number 4 is to do an analysis, which is called a materiality assessment. You need to analyze what is material for your stakeholders and what is material for your business. And then step number 5 is that hopefully you will end up with between 5 and 10 sub-targets to start to work with. Then you have the focus. And you will have to set up an action plan of how to work with these SDGs and these targets. And also an evaluation plan with targets to measure. And the 6th step is to communicate it transparently on what you're doing, both on the positive side, but also to be transparent about the risks that you have in your business. So what will be after COVID-19? I am convinced that the Sustainable Development Goals are the clearest globally agreed articulation of social and environmental outcomes to achieve by 2030. As such, they can set a common frame for governments, business, academia, and civil society to develop sustainable guidelines. However, true sustainability in business requires a profound transformation throughout entire industries, and it will take more than brand pledges to achieve this. So in order to adopt sustainable practices across global markets, transparency and verification will therefore be needed. So with risks and crises comes opportunities, especially within sustainability. This crisis is an opportunity to future-proof and change our business models for a sustainable business model, circular models. And also to stimulate innovation to preserve our world for the coming generations. This pandemic is a true wake-up call for sustainability, and it's now time to take action. We need to put ourselves out there and create results in our businesses. Because the way I see it is that we are living in a time of great opportunity. And the question you need to ask yourself is whether you are going to seize it or not. Thank you for listening to this short talk about why developing business is imperative in the SDGs, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Inspiring example of real leadership under current world circumstances. We had a panel yesterday convened by another Swede, Ruth Brandvall, on impact investing.
Yeah.
And one of the people that was on the panel who works in Stockholm was detailing the challenges of getting particularly the major companies to do anything sustainable, much less support the SDGs. So the work that you're doing could not be more important. If you could align the desire for profitability with the demands of sustainability, you will have done a heroic work for on behalf of all of humankind. So anything we can do to help, you just let us know. Definitely keep us posted. It's such important work, particularly as we come out of the pandemic. Everybody's got to get back to work. Everybody's got to, do something. And couldn't be a more opportune time to plug the SDGs into the business machine.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And the business machine into the SDGs. It couldn't be more. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
I'd like to turn now to Yonathan Parienti, who's the founder of Horyoutoken, which has been working on innovative SDGs and various SDG-related projects for some time. So Yonathan, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim. First of all, I think this initiative and this gathering, which is especially done on a daily basis, is a clear commitment and statement that whatever is the challenges, we can, come together and join together in a reflective moment to think the world of tomorrow. And by doing that, for certain, we will find ways to accelerate building the world that we all deserve, a world where sustainability, harmony, dignity, and equilibrium between the different life ecosystem are really established. So just to join on what Eva mentioned, I think the 2008 year during the financial crisis was a very significant year for triggering some awakening, and it was my personal journey in that aspect. I was at that time vice president of JP Morgan Swiss. I was conducting investment, and I was in the middle of the cyclone, looking at one side that we can still continue to manage wells, to try our best to make a solid or robust or conservative performance, and at the same time seeing that capitalism and speculative capitalism can actually destroy, wipe out trillions of wells, but more importantly, it can impact in a very negative manner, a negative way. It can destroy lives. It can put human dignity on its knees. And so that was a moment for myself where I really realized that it was important to find its own journey, its own purpose, and trying to find a way to help, finding a way to serve, enabling consciousness to scale up and to find the ways, the model that might support an evolution of the current system we are living in, and that we all start to understand that this current system, the current capitalism we are living in, it's really ending its cycle. So based on those questioning, I was looking on how I could find my own way to contribute. And one conclusion I had was the world was definitely at that time much more connected. But the challenge is the connectivity through the internet mainstream was not necessarily really meaningful or purpose driven. So it was more like what I call a noisy connectivity, and more serving consumer society or alienatory or sensationalism behaviors than really inspiring approach. So that was the first element of my thinking. The second element was the aspect of inclusion. How can we bring a dimension which will be more inclusive? Because whatever is the challenge, whatever is the crisis, if you have a civil society that has not the way, the means, the autonomy to be independent, to be capable to withstand a crisis, then actually the full system is actually like built on illusion and has no real resiliency to be able to cope with a challenge. And that's why we can see so fast that a crisis like COVID is actually impacting millions and millions of people. And this is unfortunately not the reflection of the stock markets. The stock markets at one point are giving an illusion message that things are okay or will be okay or are supposedly not so bad. But in the daily lives of people, we can see even now, after the crisis of 2008, 2009, we can see that actually we have not learned too much, at least the system, the mechanism have not learned too much from that. So the two dimension, meaningful connectivity and as well impact, were the key pillars that drive me to create in 2012 ORU. So the idea behind creating a social network for social good, bringing and enabling people that are doing inspiring actions, that are thinking the world of tomorrow, that are empathy driven, enabling them to connect and to learn from each other, as well as with mechanisms to bring visibility to the people that inspire us. So that was one of the main reason. And the second reason on that, and we are going to start a quick presentation now, maybe George, if you can activate it. It is the dimension of impact and how we can leverage technology like blockchain, which is decentralized, and integrate that technology within a social networking platform to build mechanisms to empower people. So the first element is maybe just to start with the name ORU. ORU stands for humanity, ORU, how we are building the bridge between what is singular and what is universal. And we have all the solutions if we have the ability to understand those two dimensions and to connect them together. So yes, we can go to the next slide, please. So the perception of the today's reality is like, we know we are facing multiple challenges, and we can go to the next slide, please. Those challenges have been encompassed into the 2030 agenda of the United Nations. This is a tremendous work that has been done in the most granular manner. We have now 17 goals that has been validated by government, and we know how difficult, and I thank Jim for giving in its preamble some aspect of history. It is so important to understand that to reach a consensus at a human level with nations involved is very challenging, very complex. We have now this luck in 2015 that was like, for me, a great moment of hope. We started ORU in 2013 with those aspirations. And when we saw that materializing, it was for us a great relief that actually we will not be just crossing the desert with many others that will be, you know, like having this awakening, but at the same time, we will have some echo at multi-stakeholder level, thanks to that agenda and their 17 goals. So we can go to the next slide, please. So what is important now is to understand how that major historical moment can be leveraged for finding and building the solutions that can impact people in the best way possible. So we can go to the next slide, please. Yes, so another aspect, adding to the aspect of government, is that the private sector is starting to understand over the years and more recently that actually embracing sustainability, supporting corporate social responsibility, thinking about how we can have a more harmonious impact through the supply chain and all those things. All of that is starting to be, you know, convincing arguments and not just greenwashing elements. So that is as well a very important element. The private sector is starting as well through its team members and executive and employees to think that this is a very important priority that they have to integrate and include. We can go to the next slide, please. And at the same time, we have now the citizens, all of us, that we are starting to reflect on the fact that when we are doing the action of buying consumer goods, a service, we can actually leverage that action and have that as a way to influence and to incentivize the stakeholders to embrace the right behaviors. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So nowadays, what is important to understand is we are not lacking good initiatives. What we are lacking is the way we can build synergies between those initiatives, how we can make a common stand to make sure that we will gain synergy, momentum, and we will be able to increase the speed of adoption of the mechanism that many of us now start to really understand and work on. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So our solution, we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Our way and thinking is we have a responsibility to make sure, exactly like what Jim with his team is doing with this Humanity Rising initiative and some other initiative. We have to try to make sure people are aware of what is working, what are the initiatives that are happening at the moment. And so we have to connect those initiatives, and that's opening with first aspect of our social network for social good, OU platform. We can go to the next slide, please. To have a social network dedicated to sustainability, to have a social network which integrates in its mechanism and categories the SDGs, as well with an aspect of voting system, which will bring more visibility to initiatives, actions, news, informations that inspire ourselves. Having an ecosystem dedicated for empowerment and social good, that's an immense accelerator to increase the interactions, the learning curve, and as well the adoption. And lastly, to be able to grow this cycle by sharing content, leveraging social media technology. So we can go to the next slide, please. So with this ecosystem on OU that we have now established for the last 5-6 years, since December 2013, we have now built an ecosystem with more than 2,000 nonprofits, 400,000 users in 180 countries, 7 languages, and many other mechanisms that are spreading organically in many parts of the world. But this is a very important step, but not enough. What was necessary, as I mentioned at the beginning, is as well to have the dimension of impact. And that dimension, we are going now to tackle it with the Horyoutoken. So we can go to the next slide, please. The mechanism is how can we leveraging and creating a digital token, a utility token, which can be as well considered a digital currency or member of the digital assets. We can create a utility token that can be used by giving incentivized purchasing power for the people that are considered change makers and actors of the change of tomorrow. And that's through the mechanism of the voting system and the SDGs integrated in our platform. We will be able to allocate and distribute Horyoutoken to the citizens of the planet. So this mechanism enable in its operations to be generating and distributing Horyoutoken through philanthropists, private sectors, citizens, and through that mechanism, we will be able as well to allocate the tokens to the most active and plebiscited citizens on our network. We can go to the next slide, please. So that is an aspect of distribution, and we integrate that as well with an aspect of integrating the token into a marketplace that we have developed and which will be launched in September. That market will integrate as well the 2030 agenda on the SDGs for product. So you will be able to select product as well, integrating the impact that they are generating on the SDGs. We can go to the next slide, please. So as well, to make sure, and that was mentioned in the earlier talk by Eva, to make sure that the private sector is a force for progress and adoption, we integrate as well, we will integrate the private sector for enabling them to communicate on the social network for social good OU, on what they do for the SDGs, for innovation, for citizenship, diversity, and all the initiatives that will be about CSR, active CSR, I like to call it, or sustainability. So that as well will make sure that we are as well bringing the stakeholders that are enabling so many people to have a purchasing power, an activity, an initiative, and making sure they can integrate, whether they are small companies, startups, or larger corporation, they can integrate and communicate, and that communication will trigger inspiration. We can go to the next slide, please. So that's an opening to the OU ecosystem. Next slide, please. And so now we can go into detail of the leveraging blockchain. So if we go to the next slide, the mechanism of the Horyoutoken is very specific and spatial. I think some of you, maybe most of you, have heard about blockchain. So the aspect of blockchain which is interesting is the aspect of decentralization and traceability in terms of what's happening with that usage of technology. So if we go to the next slide, the Horyoutoken mechanism has a very specific mechanism which we call proof of impact. That mechanism is on every transaction that will happen on the blockchain, there will be a small percentage which will be comprised between 0.01 to 0.1%, by default 0.05%. And that additional, like kind of a social VAT, that's proof of impact, will be added on every transactions and collected by the Swiss foundation we have, OU Foundation. And that Swiss foundation, which is public utility, will collect the tokens received from that proof of impact mechanism and distribute the tokens to the most active citizens and users on the OU platform based on the SDGs that they are involving and supportive to. So in that aspect, we are capable to find a way not only to bring on that ecosystem, and we can go to the next slide, please, a mechanism for raising awareness of what is inspiring, but as well integrating in our daily lives and social media interactions, the SDGs, that will make it, much more appealing for the new generation. They will be able to use it in a way which is in their daily lives and learn from each other, find a way to integrate their project, initiatives, startups, on how they can find as well on the local level, national or international level, finding the ways to bring solution on the forefront and to the forefront for everyone. And additionally to that, building the way and mechanism for distribution of inclusive support, which is about social inclusion and economic inclusion, with a mechanism of a digital token, digital currency, that can find a mechanism of a voluntary capitalism, where every transaction will generate a positive and a traceable philanthropic impact. I think that's we can hand my exchange on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yonathan. A lot of synchronicities between what you're doing and what Eva's doing. And it's beautiful to see all the work to connect the dots that are involved in implementing the SDGs and making sure the investment comes and the business is made and the blockchain transparency is enabled. And so I really appreciate you sharing what Horyoutoken is doing, and I wish you all the best. And there's a number of people in the chat that want to learn more about it and possibly get your PowerPoint presentation. So you might just take a look at the chats, and then we'll circle back to some of the questions during the question and answer period. But I want to now move forward with Elena Prodan, who works with UNITAR, the UN Institute for Training and Research. We're particularly eager to have Elena make a presentation because UNITAR is deeply involved with UN SDG Learn, and Ubiquity University has a number of our SDG courses up on SDG Learn. So we've been felt very privileged to be part of this developing content distribution around the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see just in the first couple of speakers, everyone, you know, starting with the Club of Rome, and then sustainability becomes a word, and then there's a sustainability conference, and then the Millennium Development Goals, and then the SDGs come out, and then all of a sudden there's all these people popping up in the ecology, like Eva, like Yonathan, like Unitar, like you and SDG Learn. And that's how something that starts as an idea begins to get embedded in human reality. And a certain point happens where there's a critical mass, and then the whole system changes. And that is what we have to ensure happens before the planet spins out of control, because the major indicators, as we all know, are going in the wrong direction right now. So this SDG conversation could not be more crucial to the future we all seek. Elena, I want to thank you and thank your colleagues at Unitar and celebrate you and the United Nations 75th this week, and turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim. So I would like to start by saying that it's a great pleasure and honor to be part of this session for us. And we are particularly happy to join, also because we are partnering now with the Ubiquity University on this unique initiative about which I will talk a little bit later today. I would like to perhaps just say that in my talk, I was planning to focus on learning for SDGs, how we as Unitar are contributing to learning on the SDGs, what exactly we think is really important in this area, but also how we as a part of a training and learning community contributing to this. And UN SDG Learn initiative is one example. So I will just start by sharing my screen, as I have just a few slides to show you, and I hope you are all able to see them now. I would like to start with one important lesson from the COVID-19 period that we've been living through. We, all of us, citizens, scientists, epidemiologists, policymakers, we all had to go through a situation that is characterized by a great deal of uncertainty. That's really key word, I think, with respect to what we had to face over the past few months. And in fact, what was happening, we started off with what some felt was perhaps qualified as simple or complicated situation, as you can see here on this famous Cine-Fin framework. And then we moved and realized that we are now into what could be called complex or at times chaotic situation, where really we were struggling with understanding, analyzing, making sense of what is happening, and then probing basically and trying things. And sometimes not even being able to really discern what is happening. And I guess what was perhaps sort of a thing that has come out of this was that also we've seen that the beliefs of the scientific communities, as well as the foundations for the decisions and measures adopted by policymakers, have been also changing. They've changed sometimes several times. There was this famous debate on masks, etc. And they've been changing as we have been learning more about the disease, but also as we have been learning about the impact that our own decisions and actions as part of this situation have been having, basically. So this was a very dynamic change. And one recurrent theme also that has been happening was what one would call unexpected effects. Unexpected effects of our actions and also policies, measures, decisions that have been taken. Some of the effects perhaps were not intended, but they were positive. Like, for example, a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions or rise in solidarity. There were some others that were expected and debated, such as the famous trade-off between public health interests and then also economic imperatives. And then there were some others that were not really expected. Like, for example, an increase in domestic and gender-based violence during lockdown, or else, for example, growing waste generation from personal protective equipment, such as masks, gloves, also from in the healthcare industry, but also, for example, from the takeaway industry. And I'm not going to address here an exhaustive list of everything. One reason, perhaps it would be just too complex in a way to do it in such a short period, because the consequences were really many, and they've affected a great variety of various sectors and also aspects of our lives. My intention rather is to say that the COVID-19 has become a very good illustration of how various human systems, but also ecosystems, are interconnected between themselves in multiple ways, and how system thinking and systemic approaches could be of use for all of us as we try to achieve the SDGs. Here, I just wanted to show you an example of a system map that was developed by our UN colleagues and that we are using in our trainings, that really shows, just on one example, you can see the various SDGs and how various policies would have impacts in various SDG areas. And by the way, when I was talking about unexpected outcomes, you may have noticed this small picture. And this notion is also very central to system thinking, is that sometimes we plan something, but we just look at what we want to achieve and we don't think about unexpected outcomes in other areas, or we don't necessarily analyze our intervention well enough. Like here, the firemen are trying to do a good thing, but then the way their intervention was designed was not thought through sufficiently well. And then the lady finds herself again in the fire. So in fact, while the SDGs were being developed, and already many speakers before me talked about the year 2015 and how important it was. Also, quite often, I think the process, post-2015 process, when the SDGs were being designed, is called as perhaps the most participatory process, that intergovernmental process that we have seen in the time of basically ever since the humanity lives and I guess the UN exists. But what was important was that while the SDGs were being developed, this idea of how everything is interconnected and how systemic approaches are important was at the very heart of the SDGs. The SDGs had two key messages: leave no one behind, and then also break the silos. Understand your action, even if it has the best of intentions, it needs to be carefully analyzed because it may have unexpected effects, short-term effects, but also future impacts. And quite often that's something that is not taken into account. And those may not necessarily be positive, and they may be perhaps affecting other objectives or other areas of life. Here, I just wanted to show you an example of our reality. Unfortunately, the way our public policies have been designed, the way our governments are organized, and also the way we are being taught at schools and universities traditionally is compartmentalized. Sorry, that's a very difficult word. Here, just an example, an image that was also developed by our colleagues from UNDESA, showing how institutions may be compared to walled up domains. That sometimes we may have various ministries, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Economy, not talking to each other well enough. Furthermore, another challenge is that short-term results are often prioritized over longer-term objectives. As political leaders are under pressure to deliver fast and to deliver in between the electoral cycles. We were trained to think short-term, to think in silos, and also to think in national averages or aggregates, to measure success in national averages or aggregates. You may recall that during the MDGs, there was not much talk about disaggregated data. Now we talk about these because it's really important also to understanding who may be left behind. To meet the SDGs, however, our generation, but also future generations would need to develop a number of cross-cutting competencies. And here I'm just showing a small selection, those that I felt are particularly important and illustrative. You can see systemic and anticipatory competence. I talked about this, how various policy areas are interconnected, but also quite often we plan short-term, we don't think enough long-term, and sometimes we have long-term strategies, but they are not realistic, and we don't necessarily use them as guidelines when we develop our operational short-term plans. Then normative competence, and this whole conversation about the importance how the SDGs and the 2030 agenda are really based in human rights, that it's a human rights agenda, and how important it is to ensure that we reach the furthest first. Then the strategic competence, that it's also very important, and SDGs are about this. We have targets with specific indicators, and we really need to plan and measure progress. And also interpersonal competence, and also collaboration is very critical to the achievement of the SDGs. Another key message of the SDGs was the importance of evidence, and how should our policies and decisions be really founded in evidence. We should learn from mistakes and success. We should have a proper assessment and robust data to support our decisions, course corrections, and we should also be held accountable. And as UN training entities, UNITAR, but also UN System Staff College, our sister institution from UN System, have set out in 2019 to create UN SDG Learn. It's an initiative we quite often talk about 3 Ps, and you can see it here: partnership, platform, and program. Partnership, it's because we started with a community. We reached out to a number of institutions, and we really wanted them to embrace this initiative. So it was completely voluntary, but by now we have more than 50, I think close to 60 partners who have joined, quite a few UN agencies, but also other institutions. Ubiquity University is one of them, but we also have several other universities and also private sector companies who have joined this endeavor. So it's really open to all those who deliver training, learning, and really want to share it with the users and learners around the world. It's a platform because it's a gateway that provides access and easy to search, user-friendly search function. And I would like to invite you all to go to this website link, unsdglearn.org. So I'm not sure if someone could perhaps just help me type this in the chat box, unless I find it myself. unsdglearn.org. This is the website that hosts the gateway and where you can actually see how it looks like. You can search very easily using words like, for example, policy coherence or data, and you will find various courses on microlearning that may be relevant to you as a learner. The other thing is the program. What is the program when we talk about UNSDG Learn? It's a space for innovating together. So what we've been doing recently was that we are working on a new service for platform users called Learning Pathways. We expected to provide you with an access to various ways to assess your SDG-related competencies and test your knowledge. This service is being developed in partnership with various institutions, members of UNSDG Learn. And we really hope that it will be useful in first analyzing and understanding learners where they are in terms of their competencies and how, perhaps, what are the areas where they are particularly strong and perhaps where they have gaps so that they may wish to learn more. And then also to guide them on a possible learning pathway to help them achieve their objective. Perhaps just to conclude, I would really like you to invite to check out this gateway and say that you will be able to find multiple resources. And the last point I think is related perhaps to also what Jim was saying, content distribution. So what we are trying to look now into is that we would like this platform to also serve as a content distribution platform so that various other platforms who feature learning on SDGs, courses on SDGs, etc., could easily also feed information from this gateway on their various calendars or platform spaces. So that really our objective is to ensure that as many learners in the world, and as our executive director likes saying, that we reach out to millions of learners so that they know that UNSDG Learn exists, so that they can see all the offers, courses, and microlearning from various partners that are made, advertised through this platform, made available through this platform, because we are not hosting them, but we are connecting users to the providers. And we are happy for any other partners who would like to join this initiative as well. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Elena, thank you so much. It's really inspiring to hear what the United Nations is doing day by day to expand the SDGs and to now begin to educate around the SDGs. And you made a statement in the middle of your talk that I think is just worth underscoring, and that you said that the SDGs are motivated to leave no one behind and to break the silos. And that is so important, that the world comes to the realization that it's not about the rich getting richer, but that everybody being included in the abundance that's obviously there. And one of the key ways to do that is to break the silos that have been so carefully cultivated by science and technology down. Someone made brought a statistic to my attention today, which is very apropos to the current crisis of inequality and silos. It was Epi Ludwig from Singapore that Peter, Mary, and I were in conversation with today. And he said that by the time the baby boomers were 39, they controlled 21% of US wealth. The next generation, the Gen X's, by the time they reached 39, they were only contributing 7% of US wealth. This year, 2020, the first of the millennials are turning 39. And the millennials only are contributing 2% of US wealth. So when we think about no one being left behind, we need to think about it within the context of a world economic system where there is growing disparity between the rich and the poor, and the rich are getting richer, consolidating essentially monopoly control and aggregating unto themselves almost obscene wealth. And what that means, if you just seep it down to reality among our families, I'm a baby boomer. My two sons are millennials. And to know that in my day, we contributed upwards of a fifth or fourth of the wealth, and that my children have got 2%. That gives you a measure of the challenges that we have with the Sustainable Development Goals and the value proposition that are embedded in those goals, and why education is so important. So Elena, thank you so much for your contribution. And I have a few other questions I'm going to circle back and ask you when we get to the question and answer. But I want to turn now to Shelly Alcorn, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Ubiquity University. She designed our course on a foundation in soft skills and the Sustainable Development Goals. Ubiquity takes the position that learning soft skills and learning the SDGs is a requirement for every single student coming through the university. And I know Elena and Yonathan and you and SDG Learn would celebrate the day when every school in the world teaches as just a matter of course those values and propositions that lead to personal development and personal empowerment, and those values and propositions that are comprised of the Sustainable Development Goals. Those two coming together in education could not be more important. So Shelly, thank you for joining the program. Shelly is really a leader in the university, brilliant curriculum designer, and the one responsible for our foundation in soft skills and the SDGs. Shelly, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm obviously very passionate about this topic. And just by way of background, to describe the development process that has been going on in Ubiquity, outside Ubiquity, in my own previous career. I have my before Ubiquity time and after Ubiquity time. I spent most of my career working in nonprofit trade associations and professional societies in the United States, working with adult education and certification programs and other skills development that went along with workforce development. And in 2013, I first really became aware of the critical nature that soft skills was going to need to play as we move forward in education and in all walks of life, particularly based on a couple of things. Number one was the 2013 study done by Oxford University, where they talked about the inroads that artificial intelligence was going to start making into what had previously been considered safe industries and professions, that AI was going to be increasingly deployed and has been increasingly deployed and displacing human workers in healthcare and in law and in other things that we thought were immune. And secondly, there were a number of studies coming out around that time from IBM, from McKinsey, from Georgetown Center on Workforce and Education, from Institute for the Future, talking about these deficiencies in the workforce on key soft skills, leadership, critical thinking, creativity. And the final piece in that puzzle was a study done by the MacArthur Foundation, where they found that 65% of students in school were going to be working in jobs that didn't exist currently at the time they started. So it became very clear to me that something had gone awry. And I think as we look at our situation that we're in worldwide, with efforts on climate change that need to be enhanced, with efforts on economy, political systems, et cetera, that we really do need to focus on ways of being in the world, critically thinking about information, making informed choices, understanding hypercomplexity, while at the same time being able to take concrete actions towards making that world better. So when I ran across Ubiquity, I was very excited because there is a dual focus, I would say, inside the Ubiquity learning system. And one lens of the glasses is really focused on wisdom traditions, focused on Western thought, Eastern thought, indigenous thought, and things that we have learned along the way about how to be better humans and how to elevate our consciousness. And realize that we are all one. We are one with the planet, with all life on this planet, and with the universe. And the second lens really looks forward to what's next, what's coming, what do we need to adjust to, and what do we need to start preparing for. And the two lenses of those glasses really come together on two focal points for us as a university. And in the center of that focus is this idea of this tripartite learning system, which is really focused on developing knowledge, what you know about a topic, self-mastery, how you feel about what you know, and how you are in the world, how you're able to maintain your balance and your sense of self and your sense of community. And then there's impact, which is action in the world. So it's very much focused on head, heart, and hands in a very holistic way, which I very much appreciate and am very excited by. And the second was the development of the Chartres framework. Our roots are in the Chartres Academy in France. We look back to the liberal arts, and we are reinterpreting the liberal arts for a 21st century context. And what we've done is we've mapped the traditional liberal arts with 7 key areas from SDGs and from other thinking about teamwork and collaboration, meeting global challenges, critical thinking and leadership. We've mapped the SDGs into those areas. And then we've mapped the cross-cutting competencies from UNESCO and that are needed to achieve the SDGs into that framework. And as we have moved forward, we have very intentionally been building content to map to that framework, because we believe that at the center is the self, but it's surrounded by the SDGs, and it's surrounded by what are we going to do in a world that doesn't need the systems that it currently has, that needs new systems. And much of that thinking is going to come from self-reflection, from discussion, and from dialogue, which we are very, very committed to. Obviously, as an institution, we are committed to our own SDGs. SDG 4 seems obvious, it's education. We're also very committed to SDG 5, which is gender equality. And for us, that includes all genders, all expressions. And it's a wonderful place to work where the contributions of each person are acknowledged and supported. And that's a wonderful thing for me to experience. It's fantastic. So as we set out on this very intentional increased content production around this framework, a few things happened. The first that Jim has mentioned is the Foundation in Soft Skills program. And what we sat down and did is we developed a 16-week program that's developed online, but is also equipped with workbooks to partner with educational institutions, corporations, nonprofits to work in a blended environment by watching videos online and then doing exercises around critical thinking and leadership and diversity in small group settings, wherever they happen to be, whether that's an educational institution or mini conferences or however that might express itself. And in doing that, we were able to flesh out the Charter framework, and we're able to really concentrate on developing a product that we believe is useful and is a core course for all of our degree programs, and it is a core course that we offer out to the world. In order to increase that understanding, meditation, mindfulness, all of those pieces that need to be put in place. And so we've run pilots in Sri Lanka. We have agreements in Sri Lanka. We ran a pilot with the Youth General Assembly in Pakistan. And it has been a wonderful collaborative experience for us to have this program and to be able to feel like we're making a difference around those areas that we've identified and that others have identified as crucial for young people and people of all ages. I can assure you, working in adult development, we need as much emotional intelligence at all age groups as we do in just young adults. The second thing we did is we started increasing production around microcourses and nanocourses. So we collaborated with the United Nations Major Group with Children and Youth to do an introductory microcourse to the UN SDGs. And we've also developed a 17 nanocourse series that each of the nanocourses is devoted to a single SDG. And we have those listed on UN SDG Learn. We're finishing up a couple of the last ones, but we're almost done with that particular series. And the next step was we launched a new bachelor's degree in global skills, sustainability, and regeneration, where we allow students to take courses from multiple institutions to follow their own pathway. We have a number of core courses, but then we ask them to focus on the Charter framework on those areas and then have them have the ability to go to UN SDG Learn or SDG Academy or other places that have education and sort of bring that in through our external independent study, because the silo idea is something that we really want to break down. Everybody's doing great education. Let's pool our resources to get as many people skilled up in as many areas as we possibly can. So for us, that's an exciting thing. And it also gives learners their control over their desires and passions and ideas. So that's a very fun sort of open architecture way to think about how you might construct a degree program. And then today I'm proud to announce that we are launching a new master's degree. We have a brand new master's degree in global skills, sustainability, and regeneration. And one of the key components to following along that master's track is instead of a dissertation, you have an impact project where you select an SDG and a particular target that you would like to make progress on. And then you build an impact project to advance that target. And then that is evaluated for issue of the master's degree. Because we just think that intentionality is important. What do we want students to do with the education that they get? We don't have enough time for people to wonder what they want to do to impact the project. We need to encourage them to impact the planet. So that's also very exciting. And our Changemaker scan that we're developing in our UbiVerse also uses those cross-cutting competencies and comes across for people to gauge how well they're doing on things like critical thinking and those sorts of things. And maybe come in and get access and guidance to looking at content that can increase those competencies on their behalf. So I know I didn't spend a lot of time on the description of the programs, but everything that everyone has said so far has been so important. You know, the concentration on business, the Horyu network, using blockchain, using SDG Learn, and collaborating around educational opportunities to really help embed these at the core of a person who really wants to make an impact. And then leading by example, by selecting those targets that we want to impact and then intentionally setting about to do so. So it's a timely discussion. It's a discussion that we wholeheartedly support. And Humanity Rising was built to have these exact conversations. Because the next step, and I'm so glad Polly's here to talk about dialogue. Dialogue is the key to changing any system at all. And it starts one-on-one and then ripples out, hopefully, to affect all of the communities that we serve and that we are a part of. So Jim, I'll hand it back to you and we can go from there.
Thank you, Shelly. As you can see, Ubiquity is deeply immersed in both the SDGs and the soft skills and breaking down the silos that have kept the left hand knowing what the right hand is doing, and really designing an entire learning system for social impact. You know, if you think of how most universities operate, it's just about disseminating knowledge, memorizing information, taking a test, getting a degree. They're not particularly interested in what you do with your private time and your personal space. That's sort of kept out. But we're in a world where things are spinning out of control, and knowledge has to be in the service of the greater good. So that means students at Ubiquity University are encouraged to not only learn what they need to know in a collaborative setting, but as Shelly was saying, develop their personal capacities, their personal empowerment through learning soft skills and emotional intelligence and all the different intelligences that we know human beings have. And then having an impact actually in the world around the sustainable development goals. So that it's about the head, it's about the heart, and it's about the hands coming together at a critical moment in history where it's all hands on deck. And that's just what's true in terms of the challenge confronting humanity today. And that leads us to our final speaker, and that is Polly Eisendrath, who is really a specialist in dialogue. She's the author of the book, A Real Dialogue. And I can't think of a more important closing statement to the SDGs generally, and in a week dedicated to the United Nations, than having a final note on the importance of dialogue, particularly in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder and all the social unrest that has ensued since then. There's every region of the world is being challenged largely because human beings still, after 5,000-6,000 years of civilization, have not learned how to talk with one another in an empathetic, genuine way. It's extraordinary. We talk all the time, but we miss all the time. Look at all the conflicts. Look at all the, I mean, like President Bush not going to Rio in 1992 because the US doesn't do sustainability. Not even willing to go and sit with the other heads of state and scientists around the world to dialogue. So Polly, really appreciate you being here and want to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. This is really a very remarkable introduction to Humanity Rising, Ubiquity University. I've enjoyed everyone and learned a lot. And, you know, I see that what you're working on is exactly what I have been called to do in these last 5 years or so. I just want to be clear, because there was a bit of misinformation in the introduction, that my most recent book is called Love Between Equals, Relationship as a Spiritual Path. And I am the CEO of Real Dialogue. Real Dialogue is an LLC that I've started in these last 4 to 5 years as an effort, actually, to move forward on the issue of polarization and repetitive conflict. I want to say also my name is Polly Young-Eisendrath, just in case people want to look me up or look up my website, which could be, you can find it under my name, Young-Eisendrath.com or Real Dialogue. So to make a deep dive here into the topic that I'll be talking about, it's a little bit on a different level of discourse, let's say, from some of the other presentations, maybe more like Elena or Shelly, in the sense that I am looking at a specific kind of issue that is the result of my many years of being a psychologist and a Buddhist practitioner, actually working in the area of adult development, emotional intelligence. I worked in emotional intelligence actually in the military even, working with small organizations and some larger organizations on leadership, and then working in clinical psychology, especially with couples, but also with individuals. So I am a psychoanalyst as well as a psychologist. And what I felt compelled to address in these recent years was the fact that all of the different procedures that were in place, from conflict resolution to mindfulness to emotional intelligence, nonviolent communication, were not having a big impact on polarization in the public sphere. So even though we had all of these skills, something was keeping people from being able to engage with both sides of an issue, bringing both sides into communication. And what I realized was that there was a key coming specifically from an aspect of psychoanalytic investigation that says that people engage in repetitive emotional kidnapping of each other when they set up this desire to blame or shame the other and find the evidence for doing that, blaming and shaming. So I began to investigate more completely what I would call the human species, the Homo sapien. And of course, Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens, is a must read on finding out what Homo sapiens are about. And what I saw was that, first of all, it's very difficult for us to accept our species. We all are in this particular form, and it is in many ways a kind of disagreeable form at first glance. That is, we have a history of violence since we have come to the planet. We defeated the other hominid species that were here, the other human species that were here, by being violent from the beginning and having a skill that Harari calls fiction or gossip in the way that we can speak. We speak about things that are not happening as well as things that are happening, so that other animals and higher apes have language, but their language is always concrete, like pass me the banana. But our language often involves what is not going on, like I saw Joe this morning and he was with your wife. And that makes it difficult for us to actually believe what we're saying to each other. We operate from what Harari calls fictions of nations and money and religion and lots of things that require very deep inquiry and also can easily be polarized. So as a species, we are quick to argue. We are quick to disagree. We are quick and particularly quick to find an enemy in our families through scapegoating, in our communities through blaming, in our nations through finding enemies on the outside or enemies within. We find enemies among our political leaders. So with these overall tendencies in the species, there is a way that we have to come to terms first with our species spinning out of control before we can solve the problems that we're facing, the problems from the climate issues to racism, to the silos, to the incredible wealth inequality all over our planet. So in a sense, it is really our species first that we have to come to terms with before we can actually solve the problems that we're facing. And so I'm going to do a quick tour through some of the difficulties of the species and then end up with the way that our team and my little company, Real Dialogue, looks at dialogue, because we have a specific way of looking at it that can be applied to the individual. It can be applied to any dyad. It can be applied in organizations, small and large. But I want to say that it emphasizes the dyad. And I have come to believe that a dyad is the unit of consciousness, not the individual or the group. And I can't say much about that right now, but just to note that all of us come into life in a dyad. We come inside of someone else and then have to relate to that person immediately for our own care through emotional communication before we learn language or any other kind of cultural skill. So let's put up the first slide on, these are slides that I prepared just for today on the issue of polarization and the need for an enemy. And so I start out with a quote here from The Case Against Reality, a wonderful new book by Donald Hoffman, that we did not evolve our ability to reason in order to pursue the truth. We evolved it as a tool of social persuasion. And so if you let that sink in, and there's plenty of research to support this, you will remember that our reason promotes and protects what we already believe. So we start from an assumption when we begin to reason, and we tend to protect and confirm what we already believe, and this is called confirmation bias. Lots of research on that. Also, our emotions, again, this is species-wide, no matter what the culture, our emotions and our perceptions find evidence for what is wrong more than what is right. So we have a negativity bias as well. And we move through our experiences day to day, even moment to moment, noticing what's wrong, what's not working, rather than noticing what's right. So we focus on problems, and that moves us often towards wanting to attack things or wanting to blame. So 90 to 95% of known societies have engaged in warfare, and many have fought constantly since we've been on the planet. So we are up against, with our species, we're up against a very big barrier to any kind of agreement and unity that reflects both sides of the problem and leads to these long-term or enduring solutions that Elena was pointing out. We often react more quickly and want to get a quick solution. So we polarize quickly, and that means that there are sharply contrasting sides or beliefs in almost any situation we're in, and those quickly lead to the dismissal of the others as the enemy or those who are wrong. So let's put up the second slide then, that will give us just a little bit more of an in-depth look at what happens individually. So first of all, you probably have noticed that our existence here on Earth is imperfect. From a Buddhist perspective, you could say the three rules of looking at and trying to understand in a deeper spiritual way The three sort of marks of our existence is what they're called formally, are that things here are imperfect, they're impermanent, and largely they're impersonal. That is, contingencies and circumstances fall outside of our control. So with this highly contingent, imperfect life situation we're in, we develop identities that include self and other. We come into being with an I am and a you are. And we want to blame the other for the imperfect, and we want to keep the perfect or the ideal with the self. So in our imperfect, ambivalent existence of life, death, health, illness, right, wrong, truth, falseness, virtuous, non-virtuous, we form identities based on what we identify with and what we identify against, separating the ideal, me and mine, from the non-ideal, you and yours, and driving us to find enemies. On top of that, we're also 95 to 99% unconscious or automatic in our behaviors and perceptions. And so we're often wrong about what we see, hear, and feel is true, meaning that we always need others to find any truth. So we cannot depend simply on our own perceptions or even on our confirmation biases, our echo chambers, whatever it is that we take to be ideals and values. We need the other side. Even with all of this vulnerability to not knowing, we use science, politics, religion, and philosophy to align against those who disagree with us. And these activities, human activities, science, politics, religion, and philosophy, they are not theories about reality, but they are methods of inquiry that depend on dialogue and debate to sharpen them and correct them for our biases in reasoning and the evidence that we bring to our reasoning in order to find lasting solutions to the problems that we've created on the planet. So the problems that we're facing are the problems that our species created. And as we get to know our species, we need to be able to work with both sides and bring in both sides so that we can reach sustainable, enduring solutions to the problems. So let's go to the next slide. Now, as I began to work with the issue of dialogue, I started early in my career to do couple therapy. And if you want to see true warfare, bring a couple in and have them talk about the areas of repetitive conflict in their lives. So what I saw in working with couples over time is that there needed to be constraints on the ways that people speak about themselves and also listen to others. As Jim pointed out, we talk a lot and we don't have altogether good skills in either speaking or in listening, but especially in the listening area, because when we begin to feel emotionally threatened, we then close down our ability to see, hear, and feel the other. So the skill that of real dialogue is the skill that the individual can learn, and it's what we teach in our little group and what I teach online. I offer a lot of free online courses. And you could think of the skill as mindfulness in relationship, and it requires an ability to tolerate our own perceptions, thoughts, and feelings during emotional activation so that we can continue to speak and listen until both sides are accurately witnessed. So in order to embrace the Homo sapien, we must get to both sides of any conflict. And that means that we have to tolerate our own experience enough to hear and understand someone else's, while we also need to be able to speak confidently about our experience. So the skill itself depends on the following: speaking for yourself, listening mindfully, and remaining curious. And you simply recycle those. So speaking for yourself is using more than simply saying I or I feel. It means speaking with modesty, with an approach that's subjective, that you're truthful without attacking the other, this is my impression. This is the way I see it. This is the way I remember it, rather than these are the facts or it happened on this day. So speaking for yourself evolves after you begin to actually see how much you are a limited view of what's going on. And then it's easier to speak simply for yourself. Listening mindfully, that's the most difficult part of communication, which means that you step in and try to experience what the other person is saying. And then you check it out. Did I get it? Help me understand what it's like to be you. Help me understand why you take that point of view. Okay, here's what I'm understanding. Did I get it? So it's paraphrasing plus stepping in empathically and saying, I can see what it's like to be you. Did I get it? And then remaining curious. So curiosity is a primary emotion. You're born with it. You come in equipped to remain curious. You will notice when you become polarized, you lose your curiosity, so that interest in what the other is saying and meaning drops away. So curiosity is something you have to keep cultivating in a difficult conversation, because you have to recognize that you need the other side, even though you may be rehearsing in your own mind why the other side is wrong or what you want to say after they speak. So remaining curious returns you to the interest in what the other is saying. So finally, the last part of looking, I know I'm a bit over time. I just have like one or two more short things to say about a complex topic. The next to the last slide, let's put it up, is about the method of real dialogue. So the skill is an individual self-improvement skill that anyone can learn and develop. The method is a facilitated conversation, and it involves two co-facilitators. It's coached and structured by two trained co-facilitators in real dialogue. It's designed to facilitate difficult conversations where there's a critical need to see, hear, feel each side accurately in order to work together and to make decisions together. The co-facilitators structure the encounter to maximize the lowering of emotional threat and the ability for each participant to use the skills of real dialogue, differentiating opposing points of view and showing their subjectivity, their humanity, and their good intentions. Real dialogue humanizes both sides without resolution or compromise. My view is that we jump too quickly to try to get to unity, and we then don't actually become good witnesses. So the final slide is on the practice community of real dialogue. We're just building that now, and we envision working with lots of different groups and organizations to set up the skills and the methods in a number of different domains in various, for various kinds of concerns also. In order for us to begin to befriend our species, to see that we can make use of this disagreeable, argumentative species in order to investigate from both sides what is the meaning of this and what does it mean to be living on Earth, and how can we live together without dehumanizing and killing our own species because we simply do not know how to come to terms with our desire to find an enemy, whether we find it in a person, a virus, or some other situation where we feel we cannot tolerate the actual inquiry into what really scares us and makes us uncomfortable. So final slide, what the Buddha taught, which I think is always worth remembering, that hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased, and this is the eternal law. So thank you so much for letting me squeeze all that in, and I've appreciated everyone and look forward to talking to all of you about ending polarization. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly, very, very much. This question of how we transcend the enmity formation of a species that is quite aggressive and militant is could not be more important. It's at the heart of whether we can solve the SDGs. And, it's just worth pointing out that the 20th century saw more killing than the rest of recorded history combined.
Yes.
And so this question, everyone, about what real dialogue is it's just not an LLC. It could be one of the most important questions in the world. The Buddha called it, you can't stop hatred by hatred. You can only stop hatred by non-hatred. And what that non is in some ways the $64,000 question, particularly in the United States right now, which is being rent asunder by the failure to dialogue. So thank you so much. I would love to have you back at some point for a deeper dive into all this, because you're going to the heart of a disconnect in our species that we have to overcome in a very short amount of time. So thank you, Polly. And I'm just noticing the time. Each one of our speakers waxed eloquent, and I didn't have the heart to tell them to stop at 12 minutes. So I had a whole list of questions here, but I'm afraid we only have time for final statements. I would encourage everyone to go on our UbiVerse into the Humanity Rising group and comment. The chats this session have been very, very active and incisive in terms of the comments and the questions and so forth. But because of the tyranny of time, we're going to have to leave it. So we'll go back in reverse order. So Polly, if you would give a closing statement, and then Shelly, then Elena, then Yonathan, and then Eva. That will wrap it up for today. Polly, what would be your concluding minute?
So thank you, first of all, for your comments, Jim. I wanted to just respond to what you said. What is the key to dialogue? What is the key to breaking the polarization? Accurate witnessing of what the other person is saying. In other words, it's seeing, hearing, and feeling into what the other side is. You don't have to agree. You don't have to endorse it. You simply need to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm understanding. Did I get it? And then keep sharpening that until the other says, you got it. There's a huge relief then, and there's a lot of learning. It creates the mindful space in which we can discover enduring solutions. And I've seen it again and again and again, working with facilitated conversation and also working with people who learn the skill. It's a remarkable kind of thing, bringing mindfulness into the moment-to-moment, emotionally agitated conversation. So thank you for asking that question. That allowed me to give my soundbite.
I hope that you and Shelly can connect, because we would love to upload whatever courses that you mentioned that you have some free online courses on dialogue. So any YouTubes, anything that you've got, we'd love to put it up on UbiVerse and possibly our Ubiquity University course pages, because this is of transnational importance. It could not be more important. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and we'd love to share it. We would love to share it. Yes.
Good. Shelly, final word.
And I would love to see it. I just appreciate everyone who's logged on today and who has participated in the past and will participate in the future in Humanity Rising. And just to say that together, educate, collaborate, change the world. That's what it's all about. And I am here at your service, and I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you, Shelly. Thank you so much. Shelly leads our team at Ubiquity and has done a fabulous job, both as a course designer and producer, but also as the chief operating officer of the entire company. So we're very fortunate to have Shelly. Elena, final word.
Well, I must admit that actually in sessions, my favorite part is questions and answers.
Yes.
The question is very difficult. I think it's always easier to answer a question rather than speak, wondering whether actually this is what people would like to hear about, you know, whether this is relevant or not. But anyways, I guess we all have our struggles. My final word, I think, will be, I guess it was very interesting to see that we also had some speakers who were from the private sector today. We talked about psychology, about learning, pedagogical approach, etc. And for the SDGs, indeed, we do believe, and I think that was also another sort of key message, was that everyone has to be on board. So it's really important. And that's a little bit where this whole UN SDG Learn initiative came from, that we really try to reach out to very different people, very different learners, by leveraging what is already in there, all the expertise from various partners. And we first aim to really change the mindsets. It's very important. I think first you really need to convince people it's important, but then also help build specific skills, because sometimes you may be convinced, but you don't know how to go about it, so you will not do anything. So this is really what we want to achieve, and we are really, we would be really eager to collaborate with other partners and to work together in trying to achieve these objectives.
Well, thank you, Elena, and Yonatar is very fortunate to have someone of your intelligence, skill, and commitment. It's beautiful to see people like yourself that are just dedicating their lives to the social good. And so thank you for everything that you're doing, and we're so honored to be part of UN SDG Learn. Thank you. Yonathan.
Well, thank you, Jim, and I want to thank as well all the other panelists and speakers, as well as the attendants, because we saw that the chat was actually very active with great words, and I want to express my thanks to all the kind words that has been shared. I just want to answer one of the questions, which is, in my opinion, very interesting. The question was about not rewarding always the best versus the worst, because that's the same kind of system we are living in. So that was the question. So I want just to answer in very brief elements. So first element, we are not in the best versus worst world. I think we are into a consciousness, more consciousness and less consciousness. So this is the first element. The second element is we have to create incentives, because we are still in a capitalism world and capitalism system, and people unfortunately, or is it just like it is, but they are looking at finding a way to make a living in these societies wherever they are. So if we find a way to first, in a universal manner, to be able to provide informations, news, actions, initiatives, like you are doing at the moment with the Ubiquity University and OU and other initiatives around the planet, to raise awareness. This is universal, and this enables to increase the awareness and consciousness. The second element is more pragmatic with purchasing power. We have people in the world, they have great ideas, they are doing amazing things in respective part of the world, but no one is helping them. No one is providing a helping hand to support them to become autonomous with social entrepreneurship, with their company creativity, and ways for them to build an impact which will be bigger. So that has to be solved. This is about a problem of lack of inclusiveness and inclusion at multiple levels. And this is what we are trying to find a way to solve with a meaningful connectivity with our social network, but as well with a digital currency that is dedicated to generate impact, again, in a decentralized manner at the granularity of people. So this is absolutely revolutionary. And the last element, which include a voting system by the citizens, which is all of us, to raise awareness and bring forward the change makers that can accelerate this space of increased sustainability, harmony, and impact solutions that will make the world a more alive world, including with all the ecosystems and life ecosystem. Thank you, Jim.
Well, Yonathan, thank you. You have made a brilliant presentation today, and I just want to acknowledge it, that you're doing extraordinary work. And I think the points you just made are worth underscoring. You know, this is not a question about winning and losing and who's better or who's worth. We've come down to Einstein, that the consciousness that produced the problem can't solve the problem. And we need new consciousness. So Yonathan is absolutely correct. It's a question of more consciousness or less consciousness. And our job is to make people more conscious. And that's at the heart of what Polly's talking about. It's at the heart with Shelly and Helena. I mean, you and SD learn. You know, it's education is about raising the consciousness, about educare, bringing forth that which is already here. And then the other point that you made, Yonathan, which I think is so important, you know, the carrot is always better than the stick. Alluring is always better than punishing. And part of the problem in terms of dialogue is when we get into this enemy formation, we want to go kill people. We want to punish people. We want to be coercive. And to the degree to which we raise our consciousness so that we can even grasp the notion of non-hate in the face of hate, we begin to realize that working to support people to become what they know they want to become, and the allurement of truth, beauty, and goodness is far more effective than the coercion of the club. So beautiful final statement. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And if I can just rebound on what you say, which is absolutely essential, the power of inspiration and passion is a much greater vector of propagation than the vectors of fear.
Yeah.
And we will win all of this all together if we are speaking the language of the art, the language of empathy, and the language of the passion we are sharing for the people.
Totally, totally, totally. Thank you. Thank you, sir. You. Now, last but not least, is Eva Vati. Eve, give us a final word.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed listening to all speakers and panelists, and I think you've said it all today. But I would like to express I'm grateful for doing this, Jim. Without Humanity Rising, we wouldn't have had this wonderful conversation and dialogue. So a big thank you to you, Jim Garrison, and your team and Humanity Rising. That's my final word for you. Thank you very much.
Eve, that's very sweet. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And whatever we can do to support what you're doing. I mean, my God, if there's one traction point, if we could organize business to motivate them to solve the SDGs, they're going to make plenty of profit, and they're going to do it helping the planet and helping people. And what's not to like? I mean, so you're, you know, we've had the Buddha as a meta thematic, but I mean, you talk about right livelihood. You are right in the center, madam, of right livelihood. And we're basically out of time, but I just was struck by a comment that Diane Skidmore made in the chats, that she said, this is like watching evolution. And let's just take that in, everyone, that we're watching evolution. The world is in a evolutionary inflection point where humanity has got to get over itself in some very ancient and very coercive, counterproductive patterns in the way we've treated ourselves and treated the earth. And the pressure is mounting. We're either going to break down or we're going to break through. And we're watching evolution and we're participating in evolution. And every one of the panelists today is an activist in shaping the next phase of evolution. So I just want to acknowledge each and every one of you. It's been brilliant. And I didn't stop you at 12 minutes because I found what you were saying to be so extraordinary. So we had to cut short the question and answer, but thank you. And then just to say a word about tomorrow, we're going to go into those eco-villages, those off-grid, those intentional communities around the world through the Global Eco-Village Network that's been headed by Kosha Joubert, that have been living sustainably, in some cases for decades. So we have models all over the planet of intentional communities that have embraced sustainabilities and regeneration and resilience and abundance, and have figured out biomimicry of building whole communities that are living within the natural laws of Mother Nature. So that's going to be tomorrow, again, 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock Central European time. We look forward to seeing you. And once again, panel, thank you. This has been brilliant. It's been inspiring, and I'm grateful to you all. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow.